And good afternoon, everyone. This is Patrick, and welcome back to Underdog Dueling, where we take a look at hidden gems and archetypes that people might be sleeping on and compare their relevance to today's meta. So as always, I have another deck profile for you guys. And this one is a really fun Link and Synchro climbing strategy that tends to have a really unique mechanic in and of itself, and that is Rokkets. So Rokkets are a series of dark dragon monsters that can be broken up into two categories: your tuners and your non-tuners. All of your tuners have the ability to summon out another Rokket from the deck in some fashion. And then your non-tuners all share two consecutive effects. The first is that whenever a Link monster targets them, they can, as a quick effect, destroy themselves and then activate some kind of disruption effect. And then during the end phase, if they were destroyed by a card effect and sent to the graveyard that turn, you can summon out another Rokket monster from the deck. This is commonly referred to as the fire and reload mechanic, as all of the Rokkets function like bullets for a gun. Once you fire one off, it is then replaced with more ammo loaded up from the deck to be able to use another trigger effect every turn, so that way you always have an endless supply. On top of that, the goal of this deck is to also potentially swarm the field to be able to get out a few of our boss monsters by Link climbing as much as possible. Now there is a variant to this deck called Dragon Link, which utilizes a small handful of the Rokket cards and is more revolving around special summoning a lot of monsters all at once to go into a full board of usually negates to be able to slow down all of your opponent's plays. This one is the pure Rokket build, mostly because I prefer that mechanic over Dragon Link, and plus, it's just a lot of fun. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started, and if you want to see more, please remember to like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at Soren's Lair. And getting into this deck profile, I'm going to just go ahead and go over the Rokkets effects, at least our non-tuners, starting off, for when they are targeted by a Link monster. We have two copies of Anes the Rokket Dragon, who can target a face-up monster on the field unable to attack, and it has its effects negated. Two copies of Shell Rokket Dragon, who can destroy one monster in the column it was in, and then destroy any monsters in that card's adjacent zones, potentially allowing you to hit 3 to 4 monsters in one turn. One Auto Rokket Dragon, who can send one spell or trap on the field to the graveyard. 3 Silver Rokket Dragon, who can look at your opponent's extra deck and banish one card from it. And then 3 Magna Rokket Dragon, who can send one monster on the field to the graveyard, which bypasses all protections. Then we've got our 2 tuner monsters, starting off with 3 copies of Rokket Tracer, who, as a quick effect, can target one face-up card you control, destroy it, and then special summon one Rokket monster from your deck, except a copy of itself. You can't special summon monsters from the extra deck, except dark monsters. And then we have 3 copies of Rokket Caliber, who can special summon itself to a zone a Dark Link monster points to. However, you can only special summon Rokket Caliber once this way. And you can also tribute this card to special summon a Dark Dragon or Machine monster from your hand, except another copy of itself. But you can only use this effect once per turn. And then moving on to some of the generic dragon support that just helps the overall playstyle. I'm starting off with 1 Iron Dragon Tiamaton, who must be special summoned by having 3 or more cards in the same column, and then if this card is special summoned, it destroys all other cards in its column, and neither player can use the unused zones in this card's column. So for example, if you were to summon it right below the extra monster zone, and you already have a Link monster on one side, your opponent wouldn't be able to Link summon directly to this zone, which could potentially shut down their plays. We then have 2 copies of Noctivision Dragon, and when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a face-down card you control, you can banish this card from your graveyard to negate the effect, and also your opponent cannot target that face-down card with card effects for the rest of the turn. And then you can only use each of the following effects of this card once per turn. If a Dark Dragon monster is special summoned to your field, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is sent to the graveyard as Link material, you can draw a card. And then we've got 3 copies of Absorata Dragon, who can be special summoned from the hand if you control a Rokket monster. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add a Rokket monster from your deck to your hand. And then for just a little bit of utility, I have 1 copy of Bestial Druisworm, who can target one light or dark monster in either graveyard, banish it, and special summon this card from the hand. And this is a quick effect if your opponent controls a monster. And if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target one special summon monster your opponent controls and send it straight to the graveyard. Paired with it, I've got Bestial Magnamut, at 1 copy, who, like Drow Swarm, can banish a light or dark monster in either graveyard to summon itself, and then if it's special summoned during the end phase of the turn, you can add a dragon monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand except a copy of itself. Then for our last monster, we've got 1 Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, who can be special summoned from the hand by banishing a face-up dragon monster you control, and then during your main phase you can special summon 1 dragon monster from your hand or graveyard, except another copy of itself. This is just a really good way to get more material on board for all of our further plays. Now moving on to our spells and traps, I am running 3 copies of Boot Sector Launch, which is our field spell. All rocket monsters on the field gain 300 attack and defense, and then once per turn you can activate one of the following effects. Either special summon up to 2 rocket monsters with different names from your hand in defense position, or if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, special summon rocket monsters from your graveyard up to the difference. So for example, if your opponent had 3 monsters and you had no monsters, you could summon up to 3 monsters straight from your graveyard. We then have 3 copies of Quick Launch, which is a quick play spell that can special summon 1 rocket monster from the deck, but it cannot attack and it is destroyed during the end phase. And then 3 copies of Squib Draw, which is another quick play spell that allows you to target a rocket monster you control, destroy it, and then draw 2 cards, that you can only activate 1 Squib Draw per turn. Then we got 2 copies of Boral Regenerator, who can target a rocket monster in the graveyard, special summon it, and equip it with this card, but banish it when this card leaves the field. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, because the equipped monster is destroyed, including by its own effect, you get to draw 1 card. And then we've also got the Quick Play Rapid Trigger, which allows you to fusion summon a fusion monster from your extra deck by destroying fusion monsters as material listed on it from your field, but it can only attack monsters special summoned from the extra deck. And it is also unaffected by the activated effects from any other monster special summoned from the extra deck. So because this can destroy all of your materials, this allows you to trigger all of your Rockets effects during the end of the turn to summon out 2 more monsters to try and fuel all of your plays. We then have 2 copies of World Legacy Succession, who can target a monster in your graveyard and special summon it to a zone a link monster points to, but you can only activate 1 copy of this card once per turn. Then finally, we've got our couple trap cards, starting off with 2 copies of Loop of Destruction. This card's name becomes Ring of Destruction while on the field, and once per turn if a monster on the field is destroyed by a card effect except during the damage step, you can target a monster on the field, destroy it, and if you do, each player takes 500 points of damage. Now, this is only a soft once per turn, so if you do have both copies out, you can destroy 1 card on the field and then burn your opponent for 1,000 points of damage per turn, which can add up very quickly. And then finally, we got 2 copies of Titanicider, which allows you to target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls that was summoned from the extra deck, change its attack to 0, and if you do, negate its effects. And if your opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck while this card is in your graveyard, except the turn this was sent to the graveyard, you get to set this card to the field. However, you can only use each effect of Titanicider once per turn. So this is just a really good way to stop our opponent's plays, and then be able to set it up for the following turn if they want to continue their plays either on your turn or on their next turn. But that is it for the main deck, so now let's go ahead and jump into our extra deck. Starting off with our fusion monster, we have 1 Borreload Furious Dragon, which requires 2 Dark Dragon monsters as material. As a quick effect, you can target 1 monster you control and 1 card your opponent controls and destroy them. You can also banish this card from your graveyard, then target a Dark Link monster in your graveyard, special summon it, but it can't activate its effects this turn, and you can only use each effect of Borreload Furious Dragon once per turn. Then moving on to our synchros, I'm running 1 copy of Borreload Savage Dragon, and if this card is synchro summoned, you can equip 1 Link monster from the graveyard to this card. It gains a number of Borrel counters equal to its Link rating, and gains half of its attack. And then, once per turn, when your opponent would activate a card or effect in any fashion, you can remove 1 Borrel counter from this card to negate the activation. However, you can only use this effect of Borreload Savage Dragon once per turn. The idea is to try and Link climb at least a couple of times, so that way you can get more higher rank Link monsters in the graveyard to not only give it potentially more attack, but also more than 1 Omni Negate once per turn. We then have one copy of Void Ogre Dragon, who requires a Dark Tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters as material. And once per turn, when your opponent activates a spell or trap card where you have no cards in your hand, you can negate the activation and destroy it. Most of the time, if we are able to go through our plays properly, we are going to end with no cards in hand. But if we have to set some of our spells and traps before utilizing them, as long as they're not quick play spells, then we are pretty good to go. And this is just a good way to cover all of our bases. Then for our 1 Xyz monster, we have one Borreload X-Charge Dragon, which requires 2 level 4 Dark Dragon monsters as material. Neither player can target this Xyz summon monster with monster effects except its own, and then once per turn you can detach 1 material from this card, then target 1 face-up monster on the field, and it loses 600 attack and defense. Then you can special summon a Borrel monster from your graveyard, but banish it during the end phase. But also you cannot special summon other monsters or attack directly for the rest of the turn. This is also just a good way to not only get some of our Borrel Link monsters, but potentially Borreload Savage or Borreload Furious from the grave. And moving on to our Link monsters, we are starting off with one Link 1 Striker Dragon. If this card is Link summoned, you can add 1 Boot Scepter Launch from your deck to your hand. You can also target 1 face-up monster you control and 1 monster in your graveyard. Destroy the monster you targeted on the field, and then add that other monster from the graveyard to the hand. We then have one Rank 2 Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres, which once per turn, if this card is in the extra monster zone as a quick effect, you can tribute 1 monster from your hand or field, including itself, to return 1 face-up card on the field to the hand, and this does not target, so it does bypass the majority of restrictions. And if this card is tributed, you can special summon 1 dragon monster from your hand or your deck and make its attack and defense 0, but you can only use this effect once per turn. And then we have one Booster Dragon, which requires 2 Rocket monsters as material. It is a Link 2 that has the effect where once per turn, you can target 1 other face-up monster on the field, and it gains 500 attack and defense. And your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. And if this Link summon card is destroyed by battle or by card effect, you can target 1 other dragon monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Next, we have the Link 2 Overburst Dragon, which requires 2 Rocket monsters as material. You can target 1 other Link monster you control, special summon 1 Rocket monster from your hand to your zone that target points to, but the monster special summoned by this effect cannot be used as Link material, and it is destroyed during the end phase. And you can only use this effect of Overburst Dragon once per turn. And then when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 Rocket monster from your graveyard to your hand. And then our last Link 2 is Quad Burrow Dragon, which requires 2 dragon monsters, including a rocket monster. You can discard 1 card and then target 1 face-up monster on the field, and you can't special summon Link 2 or lower monsters for the rest of the turn. You destroy the targeted monster, and then if it was a Link monster, you can special summon any number of rocket monsters with different names from your hand or your graveyard up to its Link rating. So Quad Burrow Dragon is a really good way to try and get material for Borreload Savage Dragon, because when you Link summon it out, you could even destroy itself and get back the materials you used to make it to potentially go into Borreload Savage Dragon, so that way it'll start off with 2 counters. We then have our one Link 3 Triple Burst Dragon, which requires 2 or more monsters as material except tokens. Once per turn during the damage step, when a spell or trap card is activated, or even a monster effect is activated, you can negate the activation, and if this card attacks a defense position monster, it inflicts piercing battle damage. And during your main phase, except the turn this card was special summoned, you can tribute this card, then target 1 Link 2 or lower monster in your graveyard, special summon it, and then special summon a level 4 or lower dragon monster from your hand, allowing you to potentially refuel a lot of your strategies. Then for our Link 4s, I've got 1 Unchained Abomination that requires 2 or more monsters, including a Link monster. If a card on the field is destroyed by a card effect, except by Abomination, and except during the damage step, you can target a card on the field, destroy it. When another monster is destroyed by battle, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. And during the end phase, you can also target a card on the field and destroy it. We then have 1 Link 4 Topologic Zeraboros, which requires 2 effect monsters as material. You can't summon or set monsters to any extra monster zone this card points to, and it gains 200 attack for each banished card. And if another monster is special summoned to a zone a Link monster points to, while this monster is on the field, banish all cards on the field, and then once per turn during the standby phase of the next turn, after this card was banished by its effect, you get to special summon this banished card. Then we've got one Borolo Dragon, which requires 3 or more effect monsters as material. Neither player can target this card with monster effects. And once per turn, you can target one face-up monster on the field. It loses 500 attack and defense, and your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response. Then at the start of the damage step, if this card attacks an opponent's monster, you can place that opponent's monster in a zone this card points to, take control of it, but send it to the graveyard during the end phase of the next turn. This is a good way to get rid of a problem monster, and then potentially just straight up close out any games. We then have one Borosword Dragon, which requires 3 or more effect monsters as material. It cannot be destroyed by battle, and once per turn you can target an attack position monster, change it to defense position. Also, this card can make a second attack during each battle phase this turn, and your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response to its activation. And once per turn when this card declares an attack on a face-up monster, you can, until the end of this turn, make this card gain attack equal to half the opponent's monster's current attack, and if it does, that monster's current attack is halved. So not only does this take half of the monster's attack, this also halves their original attack, allowing you to pretty much be able to beat over any monster. Then finally, we have one copy of Boral End Dragon, which requires 3 or more effect monsters as material. It can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, and neither player can target this card with monster effects. This card can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each, and then as a quick effect you can target one effect monster on the field and one rocket monster in your graveyard. Negate the effects of that monster on the field, and if you do, special summon that other monster. And your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. So I really hope you start to see a pattern. But that is it for the deck profile. I really hope you enjoyed. This deck is a lot of fun and can combo off pretty well. And I love its mechanic more than just standard Dragon Link. Hope you look forward to more deck profiles and possible test hands in the future. But until next time, we are signing out.